What's up, Unity people? This is James. So we're in our 2D platform gaming tutorial series. This is video number 6. If you haven't watched the first 5, I recommend it. Today we're going to build a platform for our player object, which I will show you here. It's moving and jumping. And we're going to go ahead and give him some stuff to jump on, some platforms. So let's go ahead and get started doing that. We're going to start out by creating a cube. Okay. And we need to make sure it's in line with our player. And once we have that, what we need to do is resize our platform so he can jump on it. So we're going to go ahead and use the scale tool and scale that out. Alright. And we can go ahead and move that down. And we'll go to the X and scale it on the Z, but not too big. Now, the reason we're scaling it on the Z, even though you can't see the difference, is because later on when we put enemies and other objects in the game, they're going to also need to collide with this platform. And they won't be directly in line with the player, so we need a little extra space, I guess is what you could call it. Okay, now that that's all set, let's go ahead and try this out. And we jump. And we made it. Now, since the last video, you'll notice that my player jumps and moves a little differently. So I'll show you how I got that to happen. I went in here to the character motor controller. I thought that he didn't really play all that great. So what I did was I changed these values for ground acceleration, air acceleration, gravity was all the way up to 60, the fall speed is 40, and I changed the base height, which was 1. Now if I play it with the 1 for the base jump height, he doesn't get very high. And I wanted him to be able to walk under the platform and jump onto it. So I went ahead and adjusted the base height up to 4 for his jumping. So now he's got the skills to make it. Okay, so those are just some player movement adjustments I made. You don't have to do those. I just thought it played a little better and looked a little better. So on our platform, it's just pretty much a gray square right now. We want this to look a little bit different. So what we're going to do is go ahead and I'm going to show you a couple of textures that I imported. This texture here, which is a girder I made because this is a warehouse style environment with just a couple of holes in it. And we made a shadow for it. I can show you that one too. It's just black. And we'll get into why these are important in a second. So what we're going to do is take our girder OO vert texture and we're going to create a new material for it. We're going to right click, create material, and name it girder OO. I called it girder OO because it has those 2 holes in the center of it. Go ahead and select a texture and we'll grab our girder, and that looks pretty good. And you'll notice that if I click on the texture here, I've changed the settings, so it is set to repeat, point, 32, and 16-bit, and the same for the shadow. Now the reason we left repeat on instead of saying clamp is because we want to be able to tile this the same way we did with the background in the previous video. So we're going to take our material and we're going to drag it onto our cube. Now you notice that's pretty ugly right now. So let's go ahead and start up that tiling. And let's just say 10. Well, that looks pretty good. I like it. Now what we need to do is the shadow. Now this is a little bit trickier. What we're going to do is we're going to create a plane at the same place that our cube is made. So select your cube, make sure it's highlighted blue in the hierarchy panel, and press F in the scene window. That'll focus on the exact point at which the box is on. So we go to Game Object, Create Other, Plane. There it is. We're going to rotate this on the X 90 degrees and on the Y 180. So it's staring at us. So now we need to shrink this down because it's too big and put it just a little bit skinnier than the platform is. Okay, and now we're going to shrink it down vertically and move it down. That's a bit tall, so let's shrink it some more. Okay, now we need to put our shadow in, so let's right click and create another material for the shadow. I'm going to call this girder 00 shadow. We're going to select our shadow object or texture, and we're going to change the shader from diffuse to transparent diffuse. Okay, and now we can drag that onto our plane. We're also going to need to set the tiling of this to 10 so it matches the same. Now that's a pretty dark shadow on this, so what we need to do is change the alpha so it blends a little better. So we're going to click on the main color box. Not going to change the color, but down here you'll see A, alpha. That stands for the transparency of the object. So what we're going to do is just turn that down so we get a nice shadow effect on our platform. Okay? And this just adds a little bit of 3D depth to it and everything else. So if we play our game now, the player can run over and he can jump, but you'll notice the shadow doesn't affect him. It only affects the platform, which we can now jump on, and everything looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and make it so that the shadow actually affects the player. Now to do this, we talked before about our sandwich, where we have the back as the first piece of bread. We have our cheese layer, where we have all kinds of cool little graphics and things that don't really affect gameplay. And then we have our meat layer, the important part of the sandwich. If you're a vegetarian, I'm sorry. You got your player, your platforms, your enemies, stuff like that. Then you have your extra layers in the front, where you can put in GUI stuff, text for the player to see, all kinds of things like that. And then you have the last piece of bread that goes on top, the camera. Okay, so in the bread layer, we want our shadow object to actually be in front of the player so that it affects the player itself. So we just basically need to make sure that it's further towards the, closer to the camera, closer to the camera than the player is. So now if we play this with the shadow closer, we can jump and the shadow affects the player. And that just seems it just adds a little bit more to the game visually, and it's something I highly recommend. So now what we can do is actually take this girder material that we have and apply it to our floor. Now you'll notice that the tiling is way off. It's really hideous. But if you change the tiling in the actual material, if we select the floor and we come over here to our girder 00 and we change the material, let's say to 20, you'll notice it also changes the platform. So what we need to do is change that back to 10. We need to duplicate this material by pressing Control D. Now this one is for the floor. So this one we can drag over and put on the floor. Now this material can be tiled separately. So if we say 20, you'll notice it changes, but the platform doesn't. So let's just change that to 30. It's still pretty big. Let's go to 60. That looks a little closer to the same size as the platform. Now the sweet part about this is that we can then duplicate this one, the one we've made for the floor, and make a shadow, or we can just duplicate the shadow one with Control D again. And we're going to turn this also up to 60 so it matches the other one. Now we're going to take our plane, which we're going to rename to shadow, and I'm going to just, in the scene window, hit in the hierarchy panel, highlight it so it's blue, and hit Control D to duplicate it. Drag it down so it's below the floor, and then we can come over and just scale it so that it fits, and then apply our new shadow, shadow 1, to that shadow object. So this shadow is for the platform, or cube. So let's change the name of that to platform so we know what it is. And then we can grab our shadow and drag it so it's attached. Now we're going to take this shadow and we're going to apply our new material so it lines up correctly, the grid 00 shadow 1, and now everything looks pretty good. I like it. liking how it looks. And that's how you build a stationary platform. Now, I've seen some requests on Unity in the forums of people asking, I want a platform where the player can actually like walk through it like this crate and then jump up and actually land on it. So I'm going to teach you how to do that style of platform right now. We're going to go to Game Object, Create Other, and we're going to go Plane. Now the plane is special because the plane is only collidable or interactive in one direction. The direction that you can see. If I turn my camera here, you can't see it. So you can actually walk through this in one direction and not in the other. Sort of like a one-way force field. So I move this over, and I have my plane, and I'm going to rename this one to Platform 2. I'm going to take my Platform 2, I'm going to press Control D to duplicate it, grab the new one, rename this to Girder, rotate it on the X 90 degrees and on the Y 180, resize it just like we did with the shadow, and move this down. It's still a little big, so we'll keep scaling. Move it up, and that looks about right. Now we don't want our player to run into this portion because the actual, if we look at this, the collision is happening on the flat part we can't see in the game window. It's not happening on the part we can see, so we're going to turn off the mesh collider on that part. We're going to drag the girder object onto Platform 2, so it's one object now. And what we're going to do is take this, and on our girder object, again, apply our girder graphic. Okay? So that's all set up. It's applied. So now this platform, platform number 2, operates differently from the first platform, and I will demonstrate that by moving these around so I can actually get my player to interact. So the first one we made, we can't jump through it. It has a bottom, which is personally, in my personal opinion, is a better way to make a game. But if you have an object you want to be able to jump through and then land on top, you can build it using the planes in the way I've just showed you. So he can actually jump through this and then land on it. So it's got that one direction. Let me move this out of the way. So let's say, for instance, you had a giant block here and you want to be able to jump up through it and then land on it. We can actually change the platform. Let me take the girder object and rescale it back up. It's going to look ugly for a second, but just bear with me here. There we go. And if we play this, he can actually walk through this object, but if he jumps up, he lands on it. Okay, now let's move this out of the way again. You can see there's a problem with this, and that's that my player is lined up exactly with this plane. So again, in the sandwich, we're going to want to make sure that this is actually further back than the player, so he always stays on the front of it. Okay? Now you see there where my player is jumping up and he's kind of shooting out really high. And that's because when the player actually moves and the first person controller sphere, this green shape here, if it stops halfway between the plane, sometimes it'll get stuck, sometimes it'll shoot up, sometimes it'll force the player down in a quick hurry. So it's got a few glitches, so to speak, and that's why I prefer to use the box method. But it's your game, so you decide which way you want to go. But I've taught you both ways of making the platform. So we've got our decorated platform, and now our player can move around and jump and land on it. And so if there's like higher levels further up, what we can do is just go ahead and select this platform, Control D to duplicate, and then drag it up, move it over here, and then maybe another one over here, so that our player can now move around and jump on these. And that's how you build a basic platform. It's simple, nice little cubes. In the next video, I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how to move these platforms through code, so the player has to land on them and then like follow them over. So if there's like a giant pit in the floor, I'm going to rescale this and move it over. So if there's a pit in the floor, and we want our player to move over and jump on the moving platform to cross to the other side. So let's undo that real quick. And that'll be in the next video. Stay tuned and thanks for watching.